you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in a business. Not because they want to do it, just because they heard it pays. And who the fuck wants to be poor knowing that's how we've been raised? Society is getting heavy, I can feel the weight. The pressure of success is like 100 million pounds of shit.
How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Chair Talk. Today we're going to talk about being played. It's going to happen. We're going to be played by inmates. It just happens. And again, it's kind of like a dialogue we had a while back, but we're going to add a little bit more to it. It's basically the inmates are playing chess, and we cannot play checkers. We cannot be just reactive. So it's kind of like understanding the different ways that they can maneuver and then trying our best to, I don't want to say outplay them because that's not what this is about, and I'll explain it because there's something I want to kind of clarify. But in the end, it's basically not getting to the point where we feel like we're being played so much that the emotions get the best of us and we're not logical with our decision making. So inmates are going to test us, and they're going to test us, and they're going to test us, and they want us to become emotional. So the dialogue here is just to kind of hold on to whatever sanity you got left, take a second, breathe, and then we'll figure out how to maneuver. But again, and I'm going to explain it when we come back from the break, that this isn't about playing the game with them. I want people to make sure that they understand this. We're not going to outplay a professional manipulator. It's not about that. But it's about another angle, because sometimes, even though we don't want to play the game, we're forced into it. My guest today is Connie, because I'm sure medical deals with a lot of this. So Connie, author, I believe you are possibly putting something on the website tomorrow. I could be wrong. I only talked to you. You told me about this 5 minutes ago. But I could be wrong because I like to think I listen. I do. But Connie, you mind introducing yourself? I'm sorry. Author, Connie Alleyne. Do you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Hello, everyone. Connie Alleyne here. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. I'm also the podcast host for The Fly Behind the Wall. And now I am an author for The Cage Was Her Cocoon. It is a journey from prison administrator to entrepreneur. So tomorrow, as Anthony was talking about, I will be releasing, its pre-release sales begin tomorrow on the website. So we decided to go with thecagewashercocoon.com. You can go right on there and get your autographed copy sent to you. As of tomorrow, we're starting. So it's exciting. It's overwhelming. It's all this goodness. But I really look forward to the book really being able to provide the service to other people and really allow others to know that as we go through this correctional journey, that our skills are transferable and that there's so much more we can do even after we leave the industry. So I hope you guys enjoy the book.
Yes, guys, and I will be purchasing 10 books myself, autographed copies, I'm hoping, that I will give away as well to our viewers. I was going to do when we hit 15,000 because we are reaching that milestone. But because there's so much vital information in that book, just, hope, dealing with struggle and just a lot of positivity and just a good message, I'm not going to wait. Once I get the books, I'm going to go ahead and give them away to, I'll figure out how we're going to pick who the 10 are. But I'm definitely going to purchase 10 books. And I do expect a Tier Talk employee discount. I'm just saying, I don't know if there is one. Have we made one? I don't know. But definitely by Friday. So you're saying the books are up for pre-purchase tomorrow. So what I'll do is either tomorrow or Friday, I'll give you a call. If you can give me the cost for the 10 books, that's on the side of here. And then I'll send you the money through PayPal. And then I'll get the books sent to me autographed. So if she gives me 10, I said I'm going to give away 10. But if she only gives me 10 and I ask for 10, then I'm only going to have to give away 9 because I'm not going to have one for myself. So I'm assuming if I ask for 10 books, Connie may be nice enough to give me a special autographed book because we work together.
I am giving you an extra book for Deanna. I don't know about you.
Can I tell you something? Deanna will read it. From Connie for putting up all Gangi shit. Love Connie. Yeah. But we'd be honored, obviously. As I said, it's a great read. I think our audience who've been watching, they support what you do. And I just think they're in for a great journey with that book. So well done. Now, guys, when we come back, we're going to be discussing not to get emotional. And we're going to kind of focus on the games that inmates play. There could be many reasons that make you emotional on the job. But today we just want to focus on the game that inmates play and what they expect us to do and why we can't do that. That's the key. All right, guys, as always, the show is Tier Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. We're going to go to our sponsor, and when we come back, let's talk about not getting too emotional. They're inmates. Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it, it's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
Guys, inmate manipulation is a course that is highly needed. It's the process that's so slow moving and subtle that you don't realize it's happening. When inmates choose to manipulate, they manipulate our need to react. Situational awareness and insight is going to save your career. It's going to save you from doing foolish things. Listen to your gut. So the more insight we have, the more we can recognize what isn't so overt, and we can correct our behavior before we fall into a trap that we can't get out of. If you allow an inmate to pull you out of your prescribed role, you are opening up a door for a host of problems. Inmate manipulation, the psychology behind inmate manipulation. Available now. Link in description. All right, guys, and we're back. So real quick, I always tell people, and I think Connie will understand this too, is that you don't want to play a game with an inmate because you don't want to, it's very hard to outplay. They're professionals, guys. They're a lot smarter than people think. So really quick, just want to get this out there. It's, if you get forced into the game, sometimes that puts us in a position where we have to react. I understand that. But you got to realize something. When the inmate's playing the game, they want to lengthen the game. They want to see how long they can go with it. If we're forced into the game, then our management of the game is pretty much, we're looking to end it. So I want people to realize that, because sometimes we are forced into it. And at that point there, we're looking to end it and not keep the game going. We're not going to look to, oh, he's going to do this, I'm going to outplay. No. Every step we take is to end what the end game could possibly be. Because at the end of the day, sometimes you don't know what journey you're going on. But Connie, what's your thoughts about it? Like, so if I said, that you're forced into playing a game sometimes, because it happens, right? I'm not saying to try to lengthen the game and go the distance. What I'm trying to say is every move that you do at that point is to end the game, correct?
Absolutely. So, I think about our mental health population, right? There's many times where you have people who come in and I'm suicidal. And sometimes we know that they're malingering, but because we have to treat every threat as a real suicidal ideation, our reality is that we have to kind of play the game with them. So, it's I'm suicidal. And so what do? We make sure that they can see the social worker, that we make sure that they're assessed. We make sure that their meds are in place. We make sure that they're on watch if they need to be. Here are all the things that we're going to do, because we may not know necessarily their end game, but we also don't want to get jammed up because somewhere along the line, we didn't follow our own protocols. I think what we have to bear in mind is that these inmates usually know. They know the game, they know the rules, they know the protocols, they know when you're skipping through, and they know when you've given them that window of opportunity to take it up a notch and to really get either you or your department in a jam.
Right, and I like what you said, actually, which is spot on. The inmates know the rules to a T, so they know where to maneuver. Now, mind you, when staff looks at the rules, they look to get an understanding. When manipulative inmates look at the rule, they look to go through it a fine-tooth comb to see what they can get away with, what's specifically said, what's not said. Sometimes staff, guys, just a word of advice, if you're looking at those policies and procedures, also be objective, and besides looking at what's said, start looking at what's not said. Because trust and believe, those are the loopholes somehow that the inmates are able to maneuver. And the reason why we're having this dialogue, and Connie just got right in on it, which was great, was that we don't want our emotions to stop us from doing what needs to be done because we feel that the inmate is playing the game. Now, mind you guys, inmates know the rules. We said that. They know exactly that if we do A, if they do A, we have to do B, and straightforward down the line. These are reactions that we have to have. but there's ways that we can maneuver if we're able to take a second and sit back, you know, because we know at that point, we know what at least the inmate's expecting of us. See, that's the funny thing. We may not know what the end game is, but sometimes when you have manipulative inmates and they're playing that game, especially when they're using policy and procedure against us, because that's what makes us sort of predictable, we know for a fact that the inmate knows the rules, so they know that if they do this, we have to do that. So there's a little bit there that we kind of know where they want us to go. So the question is, especially if they're playing the game, guys, that's what I'm talking about, guys, and we should know which inmates are playing the game or not. But with that said, we still have to treat everything as it being serious. We talked about inmates, you know, I'm going to kill myself, and they never do. It doesn't matter if they say it 99 times. We react as if it's the first. You know, that's kind of where we run on automatic, and that's kind of where inmates can kind of play us a bit. But with that said, we still have to be determined and do what needs to be done. But there's still ways that we may be able to maneuver and employ some discretion that gives us the upper hand when the inmate has this automatic reacting. So basically, and Connie, see if you could feed in on this, is basically when inmates are able to understand policy, when they're able to see what's said specifically and what's not said, what's implied, they're able to kind of control our reactions to some extent. That's automatic. But sometimes we have an understanding, like, okay, this inmate's playing a game because it's constant. We have a feeling they're playing a game. So basically, it is how do we protect ourselves by, yes, I know I have to react, but how do I protect myself from kind of falling into where that inmate expects me to be? Correct? Does that make any sense?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's when communication becomes paramount, right? Communication, whether it's with your colleagues, communication with DOC, communication at that point kind of puts everyone on the same page and lets them know what step in the game the inmate has tried to play with you. That way we can kind of anticipate what the next step is, as opposed to everyone starting the game at different points, not knowing where this game began and where this game could possibly end. I think when we start looking at what are all the options, what are all the end results that we could get here, and then we can plan for those end results, or we can intervene where that inmate might think he would get or she would get the most favorable end result. So I think sometimes, like, so even with us, say, I'm going to just use mental health because it's an easier example to use, but like, instead of it being the social worker, the psychologist, the psychiatrist, how about you just go see the psychiatrist? Right. So I've now taken two chess moves out of your toolbox. And now you're with the psychiatrist who's going to make a final determination on whether we should discontinue your medication, or should we take it up a notch? Or, you know, that treatment plan can be changed at that level. Whereas the inmate might have wanted to only see the psychologist because he thinks or she thinks that I can manipulate that person to do something with me or for me. Right. So it's like kind of interceding at different parts so that that game isn't allowed to be played in the manner that they think it will play out at.
Right. And if we can come up with some specific examples that could be applied, just understand it's not so much about the specific example that we're bringing about, because it could be applied almost to anything, but it's about understanding the general idea of what it is. It's about control. I mean, so one of the stories I could bring up, and maybe Connie could have something on her end, is a lot of inmates want to choose where they're housed. They want to choose where they're housed with or who they're housed with, you know, and that's the level of control that they want. And sometimes you have inmates that, you know, may try and then just technically give up. But sometimes you have inmates that are relentless with it, that will do whatever they can because, you know, they don't want to go into this one unit, or they want to be in a housing unit by them, in a cell by themselves, or, you know, they want preferential housing. You know, they want to house with a lover. It could happen, you know, and they'll do whatever they can in that effort to house with that lover, which winds up causing us to scramble, because it's not like they're willing to accept the no. Because to us, if we give them the no, then that begins their game. We're like, okay, you told me no now, so now I'm going to try to see if I can work around that no. And that's when they start to play that game based on what they feel we have to do, you know, and it's automatic. Because at the end of the day there always has to be a level of protection to that inmate that's playing the game. So sometimes when they say things that put themselves at risk, whether it's for their own good, like I'm going to harm myself, or if you put me here, I'm going to get assaulted by these individuals. You know, you have to react. And sometimes the concern is, and guys, this is for all the frontline people, please understand me on this. You can interview an inmate 20 times. And, whatever it is, but and the inmate's playing a game. The inmate's trying to manipulate some housing. Like, let's say for this specific example, that's what it is. Because there's many things they could try to manipulate, but let's just stay on target. They can add just a simple caveat, just a little something unique that could force us to interview them that 21st time, that 22nd time. It's something that negates the past interviews. So I'll give you an example. You have an inmate, let's say, that says they need to get off this unit because they're being threatened, right? And the threat is a very generalized threat. You interview them, the inmate says, yeah, I'm being threatened by everyone in the unit, or I'm being threatened by all the Bloods, or all this other stuff. A good supervisor is going to push for specifics. A good supervisor is going to say, well, let me ask you a question. Who are you being threatened by? Tell us something specific. And here's a couple of reasons for that. First off, inmates like to lie in generalities, so let's pull them to be more specific. We know that's true. And second thing is, if you don't know specifically what that threat is, you could be moving them into another threat. So if you're not specific and telling me who's threatening you or what sets, or give me something, then I could be putting you into another area where that threat still exists. So you have to give me something. And usually if they do get something specific, don't get me wrong, you could put the inmate in some separate housing until they can investigate to see if there's some level of PC needed or maybe just a simple move. At that point, it doesn't matter. But what I'm also saying is right now is if you have the inmates that keep on lying in generalities, then what you do is you can hold on to that statement. But once they see that there's nothing specific and you write down that the inmate refused to give you specifics, then you know what? It is what it is. I'm going to have to send that inmate back. Now, some people are like, well, sometimes inmates don't want to snitch. Yeah, but you're not giving us the chance to protect you. If you're going to give us the information we need, we'll protect you. But if you don't, we're very limited as to what we can do because we don't know what the threat is. We don't know. You have to give us something. And by the way, for custody staff, these interviews you're having with the inmate should be done in a private manner. It should not be done, and it could be done in a very discreet, maybe a call down to medical, and the inmate can kind of shift off, whatever it is. But it's got to be done discreet, and it's got to be done with all respect to the protection of that inmate who's going to be given the intel. All good investigators, one of the key things about good investigators, and maybe my staff will agree with this, is that you never know who their snitches are. You never know who their sources are. You know why? Because for the most part, if they're getting good information, however it is, the reason they're going to want to protect that source. Because the source, outside the life having value, all life has value, we agree with that, is the fact that that person is giving us information. So our job now is if that inmate trusts us enough to give us really good information, then we have to do our part and protect that inmate. That's what you have to do. That's automatic. Now, that's why, believe it or not, sometimes information needs to be controlled. It needs to go to that higher authority because at the end of the day, if it doesn't go to the higher authority, you could be putting that inmate at risk. And sometimes the inmates don't even know that they're putting themselves at risk. So that's why I really do believe that when you get good intel, don't hide it. Let people know so we can do what we can to protect that inmate. Now, with that said, and whatever the information is that they're given, obviously. So with that said, the inmate fails to give you any specifics. You really don't know what course of action you can take. You're asking the inmate, hey, give me some information. They don't want to give you anything. Fine. I do the interview. I write down, inmate said, but at this time, I'm willing to give us any information. So inmate was sent back to the unit. But you're kind of covered right now because you stated that you interviewed the inmate, you checked on their concern, but the inmate did not cooperate with you. The inmate would not give you any information that you need to identify if there is a threat, but also to see, well, where can I put them? I don't know where I could put them. Now, with that said, that interview holds a little weight, but the inmates still didn't get what they wanted. They didn't get the housing unit that they wanted. So they're going to try another approach. Maybe they'll be a little bit more specific and say a name of somebody just to say it, or maybe they may say it's their cellmate or their bunkie, and it's that little caveat. Now, some supervisors, well, we interviewed him on the 9th and he was good. Yeah, but today's the 11th and now he's saying he has a problem with his cellmate. So what do you have to re-interview him because they added that little caveat. Now, even though we know he could be playing a game, that caveat matters because if something does happen between him and his cellmate, they're not going to care about the interview that you had on the 9th. They're going to care about the interview you didn't have. So, well, let me stop there with my part because I still have more. I can go on this all day because I'm going to get to the next part. But let's talk about the manipulative game. So Connie, same thing here. Yours obviously going to be a little bit different of a story, right? Maybe medication or whatnot. But what are some of the things that an inmate could do that basically exhaust us because we know they're playing the game. We know they're maneuvering a little bit, but at the end of the day, sometimes we have to react even though we know we're being played.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you got those inmates who are complaining about, their doctor, their prescriber. They want another prescriber for whatever reason. And they tend to, every time they see someone, they find another reason. Oh, this is not the medication I always take. Oh, this prescriber is doing this. Or I told the prescriber that I'm having this response to the medication. Can I be reevaluated? And I mean, we have but so many prescribers. So like you do kind of run out of people to actually have that person be seen by. And then you have maybe the person who comes from central office to kind of weigh in, do an assessment. Maybe that was the intention, that they wanted to get someone from central office in because they have a different agenda that they're pushing. I mean, the reality is that when you start making accusations against any staff person, it calls everyone into question. And so it does force our hand to look at the prescribing practice, look at the relationship that the prescriber has with all of their patients. It causes us to look at just everything. And I feel like those are the times where everyone starts to lose their patience, right? People are starting to get frustrated. The prescribers are getting annoyed. They're like, I'm doing whatever I can for them. They're feeling also, I mean, from a professional standpoint, it's like now you're questioning my credibility as a prescriber. It's like all these things that come into play. And then there comes a point where nobody wants to work with the inmate. No one wants that person on their caseload for the day or for the time that they're there, period. You become known as that difficult patient. And then what happens? You end up being that person that people kind of want to push off. Oh, if something happens for the day, it's okay if I don't see that person. Put them on my list for tomorrow, right? But that puts us in jeopardy. As much as we get frustrated, as much as we may not want to be bothered, we end up getting put in jeopardy because if something's really wrong with that person, we've now had this person on a list for multiple days. He's now been bumped out, and say he dies tomorrow, right? How do we explain that he's been on the list, custody's been able to produce them, but we didn't see them for whatever reason? And so I think it's, our patients get worn thin, we get frustrated. Sometimes, so much happens within the day that we're trying to juggle all the other priorities. And this is just one thing we don't want to have to deal with. And I think that's where we get ourselves. I think sometimes people don't understand how frustration can really come into play, as we should be dotting our I's and crossing our T's. I think that's the best way I could say that.
No, I think it's spot on. And before I touch on it, I just want to mention one thing. There are going to be some people that watch this that when I mentioned the thing about, the inmate's given a generalized concern, he's not really saying what a specific threat is, well, just universal precaution. Why don't we just put him in PC? Because you don't know what the threat is. Maybe they don't want him to speak. Because inmates may want to manipulate themselves to be in PC to get at somebody. There are inmates that really need to be in PC. So we have to exhaust every effort before we even think about putting an inmate into PC. It's not just about, are they a threat? Or are they being threatened? But are they a threat? So, if you're not giving me anything valid to stand on, I'm not just going to open up the door in a PC for you, because you could be just literally getting at one of the other inmates that we have in PC. So I wanted to touch on that just to make sure we get clarity on that. But I think I pretty much explained it to where it needs to be. But also what Connie said too, with the emotion, sometimes we get so frustrated that we get overwhelmed in our emotion and we skip things because we're frustrated. You have an inmate, let's do the suicide real quick, another avenue of manipulation, most likely housing, who knows, but inmates that manipulate, I'm going to kill myself. I mean, there could be many reasons why they do that. Maybe they want sympathy. Maybe they want to get out of a court appearance. I mean, maybe they want that insanity plea. Maybe they want to manipulate housing, whatever the reasons are. But sometimes, the guy, let's say you have an inmate that's doing it every day. And then one day you come to work and it's right at the beginning of the shift, it happens again. He's going to kill himself. Here he goes again. And you're not even putting the energy towards the response. You're not, because you think the inmate's playing. All of a sudden, by the time you get there, he really did it. The concern is going to be is it didn't give him the attention. So now the fake attempt becomes a real attempt because they're trying to prove that they are trying to hurt themselves. The key is no one's going to care that this guy did it 99 times. No one's going to care that you're frustrated at this point. They don't care. So when you start getting emotional and you start cutting corners, that's an issue too. I'll tell you another area that gets us emotional. When our charges get thrown out. You know, we're working our ass off to write these charges. They are not easy to do. You know, you got to work your ass off to get these charges correct. Now, sometimes some of these charges get thrown out because we didn't put 100% into it. Happens. You know, we have to put 100% in the charges because they have to hold up. And sometimes we get mad because the charge didn't stick. We'll go back, let's reread your charge. Let's reread how maybe you had the inmate's number wrong, or the location wrong, or the time didn't work, or, you know, when you had to give a statement, it was just one sentence. You know, we have to support what we write. But sometimes there are just lenient times and inmates just find a way to be able to be found not guilty. I'm not going to say they beat the charges, be able to found not guilty. So however that comes about. Now, that doesn't mean that you stop writing those charges. That doesn't mean that, oh, they're going to be found not guilty anyway, so I'm not going to bother writing it. No, guys, writing charges is also documentation. You know, whether the inmate beats the charge or not, I know it's frustrating. I know you guys are going to hate me saying this, but continue to do it. At that point, put it on the hearing officer to give me a yes once in a while, you know, but at least you're still doing your job, because when shit hits the fan, you're not going to be able to explain why you didn't write it. Because that excuse where, well, the charge is not going to stick anyway, so I'm not going to bother writing it, it's not going to help. It's going to actually put you in a very bad position. The best thing is to always be on the offense. Write the charge and have the other party explain why they keep throwing those charges out. Would you agree with that, Connie?
Absolutely. I mean, so I've not had to experience that. You know, I think a lot of times medical will get pulled into some of these situations, and we've provided our inputs into the situations as much as we can to support, because we know what's really going on with the inmate. You know, I think in those facilities where you do have custody and medical that really work well together, we're usually on the same page, and we try to support making sure that, you know, we document as well, and our documentation aligns with your documentation. And when you go forward, that it's actually a solid package. It's not like something that, you know, the inmate could weave holes into. And I think many times trying to go at it alone, as opposed to taking that collaborative approach, sometimes we miss out on information that could have helped seal the deal. So like, I would just say the frustration is there, and I get it. I've talked to many officers that will say, I'm not writing shit. I'm done. Right? Like, but it's like, if we don't do it, then we don't have proof that this is an ongoing issue. And so that's kind of where we gotta try to go up that mountain, even though we know that it's a struggle.
Yeah, because believe it or not, sometimes guilt, if the inmate keeps on committing to those same actions, that can elevate the charge. So like, okay, maybe you're found not guilty today, and that's fine, but you do it again, I'm going to write you again. I'm going to write you again. And then eventually it gets to that point where it's like, okay, the person is making some bad choices. Now, and by the way, this is if you're an officer that, you know, really you utilize charges as a tool and not just to harass. Let's be honest here, okay? Senior officers, let's use discretion when we write charges. Obviously, the emergent charges you have to write, but we also try to communicate a lot. Good senior officers may find ways to maneuver around charges that are really discretionary charges, not emergency charges. And believe it or not, you could have officers that just write every little thing, but it's not really as a tool. It's just to harass because I want to advertise my authority. You know, so I'm going to write you for every little thing. It's like, well, that point here, I'm not a big fan of that. I'll tell you why. You already have that level of authority. You don't have to advertise that by going right to the pen and paper. Impress me by communicating and showing that level of authority. Only when stuff obviously is not emergent. Okay, good, Connie, I saw that.
I had a question. So what do you do in a facility if there isn't consistency in the approach of writing up?
All right. So that seems to be a problem, and I've actually discussed this in my show. Consistency leads inmates for shopping for staff. You know, they're going to know which people they can play, which people they can't. So what I would do is you have to go from the highest level. So highest level of custody. So if that's a major or a captain, and especially if you're on the administrative level, if you're finding that there's a lot of inconsistency when it comes to the charges, then what you do is you go to the highest level and then you ask them to work on finding some level of consistency. And that's going to work its way all the way down to the frontline supervisors who are maybe going to tell the staff, hey, listen, these are the things we go after, but these are the things I expect you to manage. You got to realize something. When an officer writes a charge, it should invite the supervisor in. They should get involved in that to some extent. There, even on-the-spot charges may require a supervisor's approval. Those are the simple charges. Now, with that said, if I'm a supervisor and I'm busy, I'm not here to run your housing unit. So if you're writing up all these pathetic charges because, you know, that's how you establish your authority, eventually I may turn back to you and say, hey, listen, come here, let me talk to you for a minute. I won't do it in front of the inmates. I'll say, listen, you couldn't communicate this? Like, you couldn't get this off? These are non-emergent, you know, because every time you write a charge, you know, the supervisor may have to get involved. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some charges where you have to write. You have to. But there's some stuff where there is some level of discretion. And again, you know, it's communication. Now, for the rookies, write up everything. Supervisors,
is that part of training?
It should be. I don't know if it is. Like for rookies, I would tell them to write up everything because they have to set that high level of intolerance, if you will. And also with that is the supervisor should know I have rookies on the scene. I'm going to be coming up once in a while. And to be honest with you, if they're not being called up by the rookies, if I'm supervisor, I'm going to start coming up more often because something doesn't seem right. I expect these inmates to be testing that rookie. But as you start gaining experience, you start to develop discretion, you know? So most of that discretion is how you communicate with the inmates. Inmates do foolish shit. Do I want to write it, or you think that's something I can handle by giving the inmates some extra duty or having them come out and do stuff for me, depending on how serious it is. Now, don't get me wrong. If the inmate just chooses not to listen and keeps being foolish on those small things, okay, well, I've talked to you 3 times. It's not working. Now I'm going to write you up. And then I'm going to tell the supervisor, I know it looks petty at first, but let me tell you something. I try to deal with this inmate multiple times, you know, and it's just not working, so I'm bringing it up a notch. But again, it's discretionary, and it elevates itself. Now, for the consistency, again, it starts from up top, because even us at top, you know, we may look at it and say, yeah, these little things that we're writing the inmates up for, you know, I mean, is it really necessary, or, you know, who's the officer that's doing that? And then you can have some officer that just, they know how to communicate, they know how to maneuver, and when you go there, their unit is orderly, it's it's just where it needs to be, and they just have that level of authority because they know how to communicate. They don't rely on the pen, which could lean on the supervisor. So I'm relying on myself first. If all else fails, then I'm going to call for help. But like you mentioned, inconsistency will only give the inmates a chance to shop for staff. Because, okay, Gangi's hard, I'm going to go to Connie, who's a little bit softer. So you do need that level of consistency, and you really need the frontline supervisors as directed from above to talk to the unit officer, talk to the officer, say, this is what we want to do, this is what we should expect. And if you have some officer that seems to be writing up every little thing, especially if they're a senior officer, you know, really get involved. Say, what's going on here? Like, I mean, I'm coming up here every day. As a supervisor, I can't come up here all the time. So these charges here, is there any way that could have been handled in another way, or whatever, you know? But the consistency it's tough. That's a great, was I able to answer that or no?
Yeah, I think so. I was just thinking from the perspective of, this is such a significant, I think, conversation, in that, you know, charges come up all the time. And I could imagine the frustration that if I am constantly writing and they're constantly getting thrown out, that's going to be a disincentive for me to keep writing, right? And so maybe there's a certain way I need to write in order for me to stop getting my charges thrown out.
Oh, I see.
We don't train on how to do that, how to do it effectively. You know, like, I get the discretionary part, but I guess I'm also just a little concerned that here it is, we want to hold the inmates accountable. We want to make sure that, you know, no one's trying to circumvent or try to, I guess, you know, disregard our authority in our units. But I feel like if I'm constantly doing it, and I do think that they're legitimate, at what point do I get some support to make sure that the charges do stick? Or is there some kind of guide that I have that would help me to do it the right way, you know?
All right. No. Okay, so basically, I actually misunderstood the question. Okay, so the question, when you asked the question, what I got from that was the discretion of authority of the charges, whatever it is. But you're actually talking about how do you keep things consistent when writing the charge or whatever it is. So basically, one thing is,
so
I would like to say,
the consistency in writing the charge, the consistency in, if I'm the officer in the unit, I'm writing the charge, but then this officer, the inmate may do the same thing, but this officer doesn't write it. Like, how the consistency with how we approach it when the inmates are not being held consistently accountable. I think that has an impact.
Well, that's
like,
when you deal
training. Yeah.
Well, that I agree with you now. So that's when I think I mentioned where you deal with the supervisors who have the highest area of control so they can bring things to be consistent. You know what I mean? So you do start with the higher levels and then work your way down so you get to those sergeants. But again, you got to have people that have a greater span of control so they can bring about that consistency, but also not just consistency amongst the shift, but different shifts, different departments if need be. We all have to be on the same page. So you have to start at the highest level. But I did want to add something real quick because when we did just on the charges real quick, obviously you want to be quick and to the point. I've done shows on writing charges. So I'm not going to go too much into detail on that, guys. Check it out. Put report writing and put tier talk in there. But one of the things I do want to tell you is this, just real quick. Take time, write the charges. But having said that, and this is where maybe Connie, another thing I wanted to mention is that there's only consistency if the person hearing the charge is going to be consistent. And sometimes some places switch them out because they don't want them to get to know the inmates that well where they form a bias. So you may get someone who's hard and the next time someone that's soft. It all depends. I mean, some people could have the same sergeant overhearing it, or some people got people from central office that does it. But most of the time, usually they rotate it out to eliminate some form of bias, but there's a lot of places that could have the same disciplinary hearing officer there for years. And then that kind of sets the tone of, well, if I write this charge, it's not so much that the inmate's going to beat it because it's just that this supervisor has a reputation, or this disciplinary hearing officer has a reputation of just throwing out charges. But again, that's when you have to make it hard for them to do that. And do not, like we said, do not let your frustration stop you from writing those charges. But again, the consistency can only come from how it's enforced, but also who overhears it, who's the one that oversees it. Now, before we come to a close, that was actually great because I think that touched into it. But before we come to a close, I just want to mention one thing. So we talked about frustration. We talked about the importance of don't let frustration stop you from doing your job. I just want to say something, guys, real quick. Everything we do has the potential to go above our hands, above the agency's hands, just into the hands of people that they don't know what we do. And the only thing they understand is what's written, what's in front. That still has to be explained to them. So if any time we're at a court case and we're trying to explain how problematic an inmate is, and we're saying all the things they've done, but it's never been documented, then they never done it. I don't care if they beat the charge or not. It's not about the outcome of the charge. Somewhere along the line, it's going to be documented what they did that day. Whether it's on your recaps or whatever it is. So it doesn't matter if they beat the charge, fine. But we're going to have that documented, and we can be able to search it and say, listen, they may have beaten the charges, but having said that, I just want to tell you, because an inmate could beat charges for any reason. An inmate could beat a charge because the due process just wasn't correct. That doesn't mean that they didn't do what they did. Doesn't mean that they weren't guilty. It's just they were found not guilty because the due process was just not fair. Maybe it was they found a violation of the due process. So please don't give up documenting, because at the end of the day, when we go to stand to defend our position, I don't have to fall back on a charge to say that the inmate did something wrong and they were found guilty and I can hold that. Yeah, that's great. I could. But even if they're not found guilty, I could still go to those recaps, those daily things that happen and say, hey, listen, I know they whatever is, but look what happened here. Look what happened here. Look what happened here. Look what happened here. Regardless of the outcome of the charge. Because charges get thrown out for many reasons, but does not mean the inmate was not doing it. It just means that somewhere along the line, we could have messed up. So please keep documenting, because you never know when we're going to need that weight to stand on. What's your thoughts on that, Connie, before we go into our final thoughts?
So we know documentation is everything. Everything we document is legally binding. And so if we want anything to actually hold its weight or carry its weight, we do have to make sure we document, and that we document in a way that the story is clearly told. This is what happened. Here's the actions that I took, and here's, what the follow-up is going to be. There's always that I think succinctness of our documentation that we have to be mindful of, because they are legally binding. And if in fact anything ever goes awry, those documents get pulled up, and those documents are what we review, and that it's what we use as a guide to address whatever the issues are.
Right. And as I was saying, just again, I always like to clarify before we go to our final thoughts. If the inmate's found not guilty because they were not guilty, then that cannot be used against them. That's not what I'm saying. If an inmate was found not guilty because, let's say, there was a violation of due process, whatever, it doesn't mean it didn't happen. So it doesn't hurt to document that, and then you never know, to have it something to lean on, just to have it there. Sometimes, again, being not guilty doesn't mean you didn't do it. It just means that maybe there could have been a technicality. So I know it's frustrating, but let's keep on writing. I know it's upset, but eventually you never know. You just never know. But eventually, if you stop writing, you will be the one ultimately that's going to get in trouble, because when something should have been documented, it wasn't. And you being frustrated about the past is not going to hold any weight for what could happen to you in the future. Now, Connie, author Connie, how are you? Just have your closing thoughts, if you don't mind, please.
I just want to say, please, whatever you do, do not let the frustrations of the job get you to the point where you're not doing your due diligence. And you don't want it to get you to the point where you're skipping steps and you're putting yourself at risk. Because if something is within your wheelhouse, it is something you're responsible for. You want to make sure that you did everything that you were supposed to do and that you covered your own behind based on your documentation and the actions that you took.
Actually, when you were like, I just want to say, please, 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 I thought you were going to say, I want to say, please, please, please buy my book. I was like, damn, Connie went from confidence to desperation. Also, I may have been a little sidetracked a little bit today. I had some kids laughing in the background, and I don't know why I found that annoying. But I know kids' laughter, they say it's one of the best things that could ever happen to you, unless you're home alone and you have no kids. But wait, I don't know what I'm talking about. Wait, I'm sorry. Wait, I'm sorry. Wait, I don't know where the hell that just came from, actually. That just came out of nowhere. All right, guys, we got to go, man. I'm all over the place. As always, guys, stay safe. The show is Tear Talk. Please subscribe. Take care. Bye.